Very good. Thanks, Kevin. Good morning, everyone. So good to be with you this morning. And as Kevin said, we're going to be talking about a topic that is truly on top of everyone's mind. It's something that our team has heard consistently over the past several months. Hopefully we can provide a few tips, best practices that'll help you positively impact your recruiting process. So with over 600 members, MEA's team is really at any point speaking with leaders across industry. So manufacturing, professional services, nonprofit, healthcare, education, many others, right? Of course, we're very strong in a number of those, including, manufacturing, one of our core industries within our membership population. And whether it's in our daily conversations or during one of our monthly peer groups, the topic that has consistently come up is difficulty in finding critical talent. All of us have heard the stories of restaurants and stores that previously had to shut their doors due to the fear of COVID transmission and regulation. Now they find themselves unable to open their doors due to labor shortages. Same thing with our office and manufacturing members as well. We've also all seen and heard the stories of fast food chains offering $500 and $1,000 signing bonuses, right? So there's an image out there somewhere of, I think it was Burger King had a $500 signing bonus. What I hear from our recruiting team, namely Pat McLaughlin, who leads our staffing and recruiting division, starting rates today have to be at $21 an hour or right thereabout to even attract any interest. And while, certainly not an exhaustive list, some of the other reasons that we see here on the screen that COVID has kind of impacted the labor market around compensation, of course, as I said, health concerns are still out there, right? We still have, a good population that just is a little leery of going back to the office, and they don't quite understand the protocols and things that have been put in place to keep them safe. Or they may have an underlying health condition, they may have a family member with an underlying health condition. Childcare difficulties continue to be a concern. And then just general lack of engagement, right? So the remote environment certainly hasn't made it easy on employers and managers, employees as well, in terms of feeling connected. So all of those things have kind of exacerbated the labor struggles that we're seeing. And when I asked Pat McLaughlin for some data and kind of anecdotes for today's presentation, one of the things that he sent over was a note that on the last business day of June 2021, the job opening levels increased to a high of 10.1 million in the U.S. And that comes from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. So we're certainly still right in the thick of this crisis. When it comes down to it, compensation, of course, plays a large part in an employee's decision to either stay or leave an organization. And in certain regions, our members are finding themselves competing against larger retailers with starting rates of $17, $18, $19 an hour. And oftentimes I hear that this, and the reality is that this can be a no-win situation, particularly if your wages were either lagging the labor market prior to COVID, or if you're just not in a financial situation to be able to raise your starting rates to that $17, $18, $19, $20 an hour. Not to mention the fact that of course, leads to wage compression and all sorts of other compensation issues. But one of the things to consider, kind of taking a step back to really analyze your compensation approach and overall plan can prove valuable, right? So not just simply adding $1 to the starting rate or adding a couple dollars to the starting rate, really taking a step back. This not only allows you to review your traditional ranges, but can also lead to more creative bonus or incentive plan designs that otherwise may not have been considered. We talked a little bit about signing bonuses in one of my recent peer groups, and a few of the examples that were kind of thrown out in some of the discussion that was had is when and how that's paid, right? If you're going to do a signing bonus, is that paid up front? Is it paid all at once after a certain period of time, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months? Is it staggered over several months, right? So if you're giving a $1,000 signing bonus, is it $500 up front and then $250 over the next couple months that an employee stays? Each of those has their own benefits and drawbacks, of course, but something to kind of consider when you're looking at your overall compensation plan and design. And keep in mind that as MEA members, many of you on the call today do have access to our salary surveys as well as pay factors, our compensation platform, as a part of membership, right? So there's no additional charge for either pay factors or our salary surveys. So if you do find yourself, struggling with that starting rate or looking for some good, solid market data, you can use both of those as members to go in and find that wage data. If we look at benefits and other incentives, again, going back to my peer group from earlier this month, one of the more creative benefits that I had a member throw out is that they're now offering gas cards for their employees who are returning to the office, right? So something a little different, hadn't heard of that before, and it's just a good way to kind of help offset that expense that many of those office-based employees haven't had for the past 18 months or so. Now they're in an industry that allows them to kind of, use some of that as a tax benefit and write off some of that gas card. So it makes sense for their industry and their environment. But thinking particularly of things that may make sense in your industry and highlighting your creativity. Of course, making your total compensation package well known is also key. Things like 401k, whether there's a match on that 401k, is it immediately vested? Is it vested over time? Bonuses, insurance, in addition to other things like those gas cards, company provided lunch, and some of the other benefits that we're hearing more and more. And if I pause here for just a minute, I know we had a lot of good activity in the chat there for pre-registration for the upcoming webinars that we're going to be giving. But if I ask you to jump into the chat one more time, are there any unique benefits or incentives that your organizations are considering, or that you've put in place, or that you've seen at other organizations that you think are a little different than what we otherwise might have seen in the past? If there's something that you think is worth offering up to the group here, feel free to throw that in the chat for me real quick. I mean, I've seen things prior to COVID, right? Massages, lunches, all sorts of things. Paid birthday, work off, anniversary days off. Yep, technology. Yeah, so all of those things, again, the more creative you can get, I think that's going to help you differentiate yourself when you start, posting your jobs and having those up on your careers page. So, of course, both compensation and benefits contribute to your overall story, but it's important now more so than ever to showcase those things that set you apart. Does your organization have a strong mission that attracts employees and helps retain them? Have you had significant growth or been an instrumental part of an exciting project, right? So, there's all sorts of organizations out there that contribute to, large, national projects, space launches, things like that. So even if it's a small little part that your organization has played in something, large, being able to tell that story to really attract candidates around that excitement, I think, is a really important part. And that's one thing, as I sit here next to Pat McLaughlin on a regular basis, I consistently hear him saying that over and over. Today more than ever, it's about your story, it's about your benefits, but the story is a really critical part. In addition to those things, do you have a well-designed mentorship program that's resulted in some, internal career growth, right? I speak with members all the time that have longevity of 20, 30, 40 years. People that are now in the C-suite of organizations that started as interns. If that's part of your culture, if that's part of your organization, make use of that, tell that story. If we turn to the recruitment and interview process, while the battle for talent is certainly far from over, we have seen some encouraging signs of candidate response to postings by MEA members within our MEA.jobs platform. I'll say, the majority of that kind of increase has been outside of the Philly area. So we've seen some, pickup down south from some of our members who are posting down in the Georgia area, but are starting to see some encouraging signs in terms of just volume of candidates that are replying to job postings, which is good. And while we're all being pulled in different directions, again, I think taking the time to review and understand which recruitment avenues are providing the most candidates and are proving most successful can certainly be impactful for you. In the case that you may be paying for postings particularly or sponsoring jobs, that analysis can help you best understand where to allocate your budget, right? So if Indeed isn't paying off for you, but you're consistently throwing money towards Indeed, maybe you reallocate that towards LinkedIn or another avenue that's been more fruitful in terms of candidates. So a lot of this is just getting out of that, reactive mode and getting out of that, fast-paced, which we all kind of get caught up in, taking a step back and doing a little bit of that analysis on, on benefits, on compensation, on posting sites. And then in your job posting itself, moving beyond simply the role and responsibilities and qualifications, that can also help to attract the right candidates or, make a job opening more appealing to a particular candidate. Anyone on the call who's had the opportunity to hear our colleague, Holly DePalma, MEA's Managing Director of our Predictive Index Services, knows that we each have unique, drives, behaviors, and motivators that are underlying to each of us as individuals. So making sure that your position description highlights those areas and again moves beyond just the the responsibilities, requirements, go into those areas that speak to the candidate you hope to attract, right? So does the role require collaboration and creativity, or is this a role where work is more accomplished through individual efforts? Do priorities change, with flexibility necessary, or is this a work routine that's, more routinized with ample foresight and time to prepare for change? For me, if I'm a candidate, I'm looking to apply to the role that requires collaboration, creativity, and flexibility. That description kind of actively speaks to me, actively engages me. So if I see those things, I'm more likely to apply for that position. Again, put yourself in the seat of the candidate you're hoping to attract, and think of those things that within the job that that will speak to that particular individual. When we look at the interview process itself, when it comes to the actual interview process, how do you keep candidates engaged? How do you combat candidates who are simply dropping out of the process with no warning or explanation? Sometimes even after your offer has been extended. Again, I talk to members all day long who have, an offer letter that they've extended, somebody's accepted, it's a day before they're supposed to start, and either they don't show up the next day, or they, send a quick email that says, hey, sorry, I'm going in a different direction without any explanation. Extremely frustrating, not an easy thing to go through. But think through the interview process, right? And while there's no silver bullet solution, the things that you see here on the slide can help, right? Having a clear understanding of that process for both your managers and candidates. Timeliness in terms of, getting back to candidates in terms of speeding up the process, and then just flexibility. So the clear understanding goes for both candidates and those internal to the organization who are involved in the hiring process. Hiring managers and interviewers should be well educated on that process so they can clearly and concisely kind of educate and explain next steps to the candidates they're speaking with. In some cases, I found that hiring managers just aren't familiar with the process outside of their own interview times and interview responsibilities. So they're unable to really articulate what a candidate can expect after they leave that Zoom call these days, right? Or after they leave the office. And that ambiguity can lead a candidate to drop out of the process and pursue, other opportunities where they're more clearly defined. I think it also, kind of speaks to the the education and the culture if your hiring manager isn't familiar with the overall steps. That then leads into timeliness and flexibility. So communication with candidates often and within established timelines is important, right? So if you say you're going to get back to somebody within a day or two, make sure that you do, even if it's not with an answer that you had expected to have, just keeping in communication and establishing those timelines. It can be difficult to control, particularly if you have more of a decentralized interview process where much is left to the hiring manager. If HR or the HR function doesn't have responsibility for coordinating with that candidate, you're kind of beholden to the manager. But making sure that your managers are investing in that process as much as you are, by checking in regularly if needed, tightening that control, if even for a period of time here, where much of the process, again, can be kind of leveraged and controlled by a centralized point, may make some sense just to have your candidates a little bit better communicated with and educated. In terms of flexibility, we're still seeing the need to have an increased understanding of things like, background noise on calls, broken computer cameras, bad connections, requests for off-hours interviews. All of these things are going to continue for a little bit here. I don't see an end for them anytime soon. So having that understanding, having that flexibility, in today's environment, discounting a candidate simply because they, had a pet walk across their screen, or, again, their camera wasn't working, things like that aren't going to help your hiring managers find the talent that they need. And it comes down to, again, educating those managers, where in years past and other roles, other organizations, I have seen candidates kind of discounted simply because they walked in the middle of winter with a Rangers jacket on, right? As opposed to a suit jacket. Those types of things where you're going to make a knee-jerk reaction aren't going to, help you out in this type of environment where you need to be a little bit more understanding. Hiring managers don't have the luxury to disqualify otherwise strong candidates for small things like that. And then lastly, understanding your interview and selection timeline, kind of, again, important. While I don't believe that a 6-step multi-week interview process is necessarily ever appropriate, having a long and burdensome process today will cause candidates to drop out for other offers. So would certainly encourage you, again, take that step back, look for ways to streamline your interview and hiring process. There's use of technology. We use, here I use a program called Calendly quite often, that allows, for access directly into my calendar. Somebody can schedule, time with me directly through there. So maybe you look at implementing something like that for your candidates to be able to choose a time that's most appropriate and most, flexible for them, and just drop that interview timeline on a manager's calendar, on your own calendar if you're doing a first round screen. And the elimination of non-critical steps, again, try and condense as much as possible. If you're doing individual interviews, can you make that a panel interview? The faster you can get through an interview process these days, I think the more success you're going to have. Now that, of course, doesn't mean sacrifice quality or sacrifice anything that's going to impact the overall candidate or the overall organization. But in those ways where you can maintain quality, maintain structure, and still, condense that timeline, I think that's a worthwhile exercise. And then, listen, none of these things are silver bullets, right? I'm sure most of them are things you've thought about. There'll be a lot of them you've already tried. Good reiteration, though. When all else fails, sometimes you just need outside support. And not to sound like a commercial, but again, like I said, when all else fails, sometimes you do just simply need that outside support. MEA does provide all of these things here on the screen. I'm sure most of you are aware of them. Everything from, kind of supplemental staffing if you need that part-time resource, if you have somebody that's going on a leave of absence, or your volume has increased to that point where you just need a little bit of extra bandwidth. Sourcing, so 30 hours of our team's dedicated time to help identify, vet, and present candidates. Full life cycle for more of your manager, senior manager, and director type of roles. And then if we're talking about an HR type of role, we do provide HR outsourcing as well, where our subject matter experts become either in whole or in part your HR team. We fully understand that we're not always going to be the best match for every position. We have helped our members with a wide variety of openings throughout our long history. But in the case where it is a very specialized type of role or a very niche industry, it's very likely that Pat has somebody in his background and in his network that he may be able to refer you to, as well as the rest of the team here, right? We're very well networked HR professionals. So it's likely that we do have somebody that we can put you in touch with if, all of those other tricks and best practices that I shared haven't had the impact that was necessary to get you the talent that you need. So a little bit of a shorter presentation, but just in terms of wrap up, again, we've seen COVID's impact on the labor market. Compensation has risen, starting rates, healthcare concerns with people still, looking for that work from home flexibility. not necessarily wanting to come back to the office to a large degree. Of course, we're going to have some employees, myself included, that do want to get back in the office. And I'm standing here in our MEA offices today, but that doesn't go for everybody, right? Childcare difficulties, and then from a retainment perspective, making sure that you do have people engaged. Considering compensation analysis, again, taking that step back, making best use of your benefits, your story, and an analysis of your recruitment and interview process to make sure that you are highlighting those areas. And then when we look at the actual interview, process, making sure we have those clear understandings for managers as well as candidates, making sure we're communicating in a timely manner, and then, again, having that flexibility, because that is such a needed thing these days. So I do have a question here in the chat about vaccinations and whether or not we think that will be a deterrent to hiring candidates. It's a really good one. It depends on the candidate you're trying to attract, right? So we see that in the news all the time, right? We've got two different kind of factions on how people believe in vaccinations. I think you're gonna attract people who are gonna feel more comfortable with a fully vaccinated workforce, right? If they're looking at a job and they say, yeah, that's really gonna appeal to me. You've got others that are adamantly against, getting the vaccine, so that's going to deter them. Now, part of that would go back to, whether that role is one that can be done from home, right? If it's a critical role for you, is requiring the vaccination for somebody that can work from home and doesn't have to come to the office, appropriate, right? And is that going to limit your talent pool? So all things to consider, but it is a good question, and we'll kind of see that play out over the next couple months here, I'm sure. Any other questions in the chat here before I turn it back over to Kevin?
Yeah, Matt, there were a couple. Someone asked if you could just briefly explain MEA.jobs. Someone wasn't familiar with that.
Sure, yeah. So MEA.jobs is our applicant tracking system that we have here at MEA. It allows our members to post jobs to a whole number of job boards, right? So Simply Hired, Indeed, ZipRecruiter, LinkedIn. I believe it also goes out to Monster. So for those members who either don't have an applicant tracking system that allows them to kind of centralize their candidates, or they're just looking for a more economical way to get their jobs distributed to multiple job boards, MEA.jobs can be a good one. So it's $195 for a 90-day posting. So that's probably about what you would spend for a 30-day posting on a single job board, if not even less than that. And it is kind of the way we think of it as a parking spot, right? So we do have some members that will post a job for 90 days. They find their candidate within 30 or 45, and then they swap that role out for another one at no additional cost. They just use up the remainder of that 90-day window. So it can prove kind of valuable for those jobs where you just need that additional distribution, or you want to centralize your candidates coming in from multiple job boards.
Great, thank you. In the very beginning, you mentioned something about $21 an hour, and I think some of us missed the explanation of which jobs that you were referring to.
Yeah, so we're seeing that $21 an hour a lot in, more of your administrative kind of entry level type of roles, certainly within the manufacturing space. But that seems to be the minimum these days in terms of being able to attract candidates, is right in that $21 an hour, again, because we're seeing Target, Amazon, the large retailers raise their rates to close to that level. As well as add in benefits like paid college. I think it was it Target now that's doing I think paid college education for their colleagues. So it's a very, very competitive market right now.
Yeah, and again, that may be, and this ties to another question about once the supplemental unemployment benefits go down, you probably will see a change in employment pools. We've seen a little bit of that. I believe that $21, I've seen that reference as well, is almost the equivalent of somebody that's getting full unemployment and the supplemental. So, again, I think it's always good to make sure that you know what's going on in your region and the market on a very timely basis. As Matt mentioned, we do have our salary surveys, which we just released those for MEA members that have current up to date as of through June, July. And then the pay factors tool is another way to check for rates. And I know this is one of the big difficulties everyone's facing is which things can I change, because it's not only that new hire has implication, but it's got an implication on the rest of your workforce. That's where the use of variable or flexible or bonuses as a way to get candidates in is oftentimes attractive, where someone can't kind of adjust their complete pay scale. But again, I think every industry is facing this shortage right now, which we hope will improve, but I still think everything Matt's talking about in terms of being on your A game on every aspect of your recruiting is super important. And I just want to reaffirm, or kind of reemphasize that story is really important. And, I'd look on your website and on your ads, say, is it really explaining to somebody why they want to work with you? Like, what's the value? Because let's face it, every time someone goes and looks for a job, there's 100 other jobs up there. So you need something to distinguish yourself. And we have to kind of get out of a little bit of, let me tell you what I want from you, job description, to more of what are you going to get out of this job. So great comments and suggestions there, Matt. Someone asked if we will summarize. We always will send out the slides and the recording, but we'll see if we can kind of jot this into a little bit of a tips and tricks blog or communication for everyone to take advantage of. But thank you very much, Matt. Great job.
Yeah, the last thing I'll add there, Kevin, real quick with pay factors. So for any of our members that either haven't used pay factors or could use a little bit of a refresher, happy to do a call with you. I do that quite often with our members, and we have a little bit of additional what's the word access here at MEA. So if there is a job that's a little bit more niche, I'm happy to jump on a Zoom call, walk through that with you, and get you the data that you need.